You have everything you're supposed to want: the job, the relationship, the apartment, the friends, the life that looks perfect on paper. And yet, there's this feeling, this gnawing, constant, suffocating feeling that something's wrong, that you're living someone else's life, that you're going through the motions, checking boxes, playing a role, but the person doing it isn't really you. You feel lost. Not lost like, I don't know what career to choose. Lost like, I don't know who I am. Lost like there's a stranger living inside your skin, making your decisions, speaking your words, living your days. And the worst part? You can't explain it to anyone. Because how do you tell people you feel empty when your life looks full? How do you say you're suffocating when nothing's technically wrong? How do you admit you don't recognize yourself when you're doing everything right? So you don't say anything. You smile, you function, you perform, and the feeling gets worse. Now here's what's going to mess with your head. Freud knew exactly what this feeling was. He saw it in patient after patient, successful people, accomplished people, people who'd done everything society told them to do, and they were dying inside. Not metaphorically, literally dying. Their bodies were manifesting symptoms doctors couldn't explain. Paralysis with no physical cause. Blindness with healthy eyes. Pain that had no medical origin. Freud called them hysterical symptoms. But that term is misleading, because there was nothing irrational about what was happening. These people's bodies were screaming what their mouths couldn't say. And when Freud started digging, when he started asking not, what's wrong with you, but what part of you have you been silencing, everything changed. Because he discovered something that'll reframe your entire existence. You don't feel lost because you haven't found yourself. You feel lost because you buried yourself. Somewhere along the way, probably in childhood, probably to survive, probably because you had no other choice, you learned that certain parts of you were unacceptable, dangerous, wrong. Maybe your anger wasn't allowed. Maybe your sadness was too much. Maybe your joy was too loud. Maybe your needs were a burden. Maybe your desires were shameful. So you did what any smart kid does. You hid those parts. You pushed them down. You locked them away in the basement of your psyche and tried to forget they existed. And you built a new version of yourself. A version that was acceptable, likable, safe. Freud would call this your neurotic personality. The persona you constructed to navigate a world that couldn't handle the real you. But here's the thing that nobody tells you. Those buried parts, they didn't die. They're still down there, still alive, still desperate to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged. And every day you ignore them. Every day you live as this false version of yourself. Every day you perform instead of exist. They get louder. They become the anxiety you can't explain, the depression that makes no sense, the physical symptoms doctors can't diagnose, the vague, persistent feeling that you're not living your actual life. That feeling of being lost, that's not confusion. That's your true self screaming from the basement. But here's where it gets really dark, because the reason you can't hear it, the reason you feel lost instead of found, has everything to do with what happened to you when you were too young to fight back. Let me take you back to a moment you probably don't remember. You're 4, maybe 5 years old, and you're feeling something big. Maybe it's rage, maybe it's fear, maybe it's overwhelming joy. Whatever it is, it's real. It's you, raw and unfiltered. And then you express it. Maybe you scream, maybe you cry, maybe you laugh too loud. Maybe you say what you actually want instead of what you're supposed to want. And something happens. A parent's face changes. Their voice gets sharp. Or worse, they go silent, cold, distant. And in that moment, your little brain makes a calculation, an unconscious survival-level calculation. This part of me is dangerous. This part of me makes them leave. This part of me isn't safe. So you learn. Fast. You learn that anger gets you punished, that sadness makes you a burden, that excitement is too much, that asking for what you need makes you selfish, that certain feelings, certain desires, certain parts of who you are, they're not acceptable. And here's what Freud understood that most people miss. You don't just learn to hide those parts. You learn to hate them. Because if the people you depend on for survival, the people whose love literally keeps you alive, can't handle certain parts of you, then those parts must be fundamentally wrong, broken, shameful. So you don't just repress them, you go to war with them. Your anger becomes something you're ashamed of. Your needs become something you apologize for. Your authentic self becomes the enemy. And you build a new version, a safer version, a version that gets approval instead of rejection, love instead of abandonment. Freud called this the creation of the neurotic personality, but I think there's a better way to understand it. You became a performer in a play you never auditioned for, and the role you're playing? It's based entirely on what other people needed you to be, not who you actually are. Your parents needed you to be quiet? You became quiet, even though your real self was loud. They needed you to be strong? You became strong, even though your real self was scared and needed comfort. They needed you to be successful? You became an achiever, even though your real self just wanted to create, to play, to exist without pressure. They needed you to not have problems. You became the happy one, the easy one, even though your real self was drowning. And here's the truly devastating part. You were so good at it, so convincing, so committed to the role, that eventually you forgot you were acting. The mask became your face. The performance became your personality. The false self became the only self you knew. And the real you, the angry you, the sad you, the scared you, the joyful you, the messy you, the authentic you, you locked it in the basement and threw away the key. Freud saw this pattern in every single neurotic patient he treated. People who'd spent decades living as someone else. People who'd optimized themselves for other people's comfort and lost themselves completely in the process. And you know what the really messed up part is? It worked. You got the approval, you got the love, you got to stay safe, but you paid for it with your soul. Because here's what nobody tells you about repression, about silencing parts of yourself, about living as a false self. The parts you bury don't stay buried quietly. They don't just sit there in the basement, peaceful and dormant. They rage, they scream, they claw at the walls. And when you can't hear them consciously, when you've built your walls too thick, when you've convinced yourself they don't even exist anymore, they find other ways to be heard. And that's when your body starts speaking the words your mouth won't say. Your unconscious is not a graveyard where feelings go to die. It's a prison, and the inmates are rioting. Every emotion you've ever repressed, every desire you've ever denied, every part of yourself you've ever silenced, they're all still there, alive, active, demanding to be acknowledged. And when you won't listen, when you keep plastering on that smile and insisting everything's fine, when you keep performing your role like a good little actor, they start breaking things. This is what Freud discovered that changed everything. Repressed content doesn't just sit passively in your unconscious. It fights to become conscious. It converts into symptoms. It hijacks your body, your emotions, your entire life. That anxiety attack that came out of nowhere, that's not random. That's your repressed fear finally finding a way to be heard. That chronic pain doctors can't explain. That's not all in your head. Well, actually it is, but not in the way they mean. That's your body expressing what your mind won't let you feel. That depression that makes no logical sense. You have everything, right? You should be happy. That's not a chemical imbalance. That's your authentic self, buried alive, slowly suffocating and dragging you down with it. Freud had patients who couldn't walk. Perfectly healthy legs, no physical damage, but they couldn't walk. He had patients who went blind, healthy eyes, perfect optics, but they couldn't see. He had patients with paralysis, seizures, fainting spells, all with zero medical explanation. And you know what he found when he started digging into their unconscious? Every single symptom was a message, a symbolic representation of something they couldn't consciously acknowledge. The woman who couldn't walk. She was in a marriage she desperately wanted to leave but couldn't admit it, so her body made the decision for her. Can't walk down the aisle, can't walk into his bedroom, can't keep walking this path. The man who went blind, he'd witnessed something in his childhood, something traumatic, something he couldn't process. So his psyche made a deal. You don't want to see it? Fine, you won't see anything. Your unconscious is literal. It's a child. It doesn't do metaphors the way your conscious mind does. It takes your repressed truths and converts them into physical reality. I can't stomach this anymore. Stomach problems. This is breaking my heart. Heart palpitations. I can't stand this. Back pain. I need to get this off my chest. Breathing problems. Your body is speaking the language your mind refuses to speak. And here's what makes this absolutely terrifying. Talk therapy doesn't fix this. Positive thinking doesn't touch it. Medication might numb it, but it doesn't resolve it. Because you're not dealing with a conscious problem. You can't logic your way out of unconscious repression. The part of you that's screaming isn't interested in your rational explanations. It doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't respond to self-help books or motivational speeches. It only responds to one thing: being heard, not placated, not medicated, not reasoned with, heard, acknowledged, validated, brought into the light. And that's what Freud's entire method was built around, creating a space where the unconscious could finally speak, where the repressed parts could finally surface, where the false self could crack just enough for the real self to peek through. But here's the problem. Most people don't understand about this process. Your conscious mind doesn't want this to happen, because the conscious mind, your ego, has invested everything in maintaining the false self. It's built an entire identity around being the person you think you should be, and it has a weapon, a voice, a relentless, vicious voice that keeps you in line. Freud called it the superego, but you know it by another name. You call it you, that voice in your head that criticizes everything you do, that tells you you're not good enough, that judges your every move, that keeps you small, keeps you safe, keeps you performing. You think that's your voice, your thoughts, your standards. But here's what Freud discovered that's going to make you question everything. That's not your voice at all. Close your eyes for a second. Listen to that voice in your head, the one that's always commenting, always judging, always critiquing. You're not doing enough. You should be further along by now. What's wrong with you? You're being lazy. You're too sensitive. Stop being so emotional. You need to try harder. That voice feels like you, doesn't it? Like your own thoughts, your own standards, your own internal dialogue. But here's what's going to mess you up. That's not your voice. That's theirs. Freud called it the superego, the internalized voice of authority, the part of your psyche that absorbed every rule, every judgment, every criticism from your parents, your teachers, your culture, and now plays it on repeat inside your skull. It's your mother's disappointment, your father's expectations, your teacher's impatience, society's standards, all compressed into a single voice that sounds like you but isn't you at all. Think about it. When you criticize yourself, whose words are you using? You're so lazy. Who called you lazy first? You're too much. Who told you that you were overwhelming? You should be ashamed of yourself. Who taught you shame? Stop crying. Who couldn't handle your tears? You're not generating original thoughts. You're playing a recording that's been on loop since childhood. And here's the really sick part. The superego doesn't want you to succeed. It doesn't want you to be happy. It doesn't want you to find yourself. It wants you to stay in line, to follow the rules, to be who you're supposed to be, not who you actually are. Because the superego's job, the reason it exists, is to make you acceptable to others, to keep you from being rejected, abandoned, cast out. So it attacks anything authentic, anything real, anything that might make you stand out, speak up, or, God forbid, be yourself. Your real desires. Selfish. Your real emotions. Inappropriate. Your real needs. Too much to ask. Your real self. Not good enough. The superego is the enforcer of the false self. It's the prison guard making sure the real you stays locked in the basement. And the truly devastating thing? It uses your own voice to do it, so you don't even realize you're under attack. You think you're just being realistic or holding yourself accountable or having standards. But Freud would tell you that's not accountability, that's abuse. You're abusing yourself with someone else's voice and calling it self-improvement. And here's where it gets even darker. The superego doesn't just criticize. It creates what Freud called neurotic guilt. Guilt that has nothing to do with actual wrongdoing and everything to do with being yourself. You feel guilty for resting, for saying no, for wanting things, for taking up space, for existing in a way that doesn't serve others. That guilt isn't coming from your conscience. It's coming from the internalized voice of everyone who needed you to be smaller, quieter, easier, less. And that guilt is what keeps you performing, keeps you in the role, keeps you living as the false self. Because if you step out of character, if you start being authentic, if you start listening to the real you in the basement, the superego loses control. And it will fight like hell to prevent that. It'll make you feel selfish for having needs, weak for having feelings, broken for wanting change. To convince you that the prison is actually safety, that the performance is actually you, that the false self is the only self worth being. And most people never question it. They live their entire lives listening to a voice that isn't theirs, following rules they never agreed to, being someone they never chose to be. They die without ever knowing who they actually were. Freud saw this pattern everywhere. He called it neurosis, the war between who you are and who you've been told to be. And the casualties of that war, they're all around you. People who look successful but feel empty. People who seem happy but are dying inside. People who have everything and feel nothing. People who are lost because the map they're following was drawn by someone else. But if you think that's just an abstract psychological concept, let me show you how this plays out in real life. Let me tell you about one of Freud's patients, someone who looked perfect on the outside but was being destroyed from within. And when you hear this story, you're going to see yourself in it. I guarantee it. Her name was Anna. Well, not really. Freud changed the names, but let's call her Anna. 32 years old, educated, well married, came from a good family, had everything a woman of her era was supposed to want, and she couldn't move her right arm. No injury, no physical cause. The doctors examined her. Perfectly healthy muscles, intact nerves, no damage whatsoever. But the arm hung there, limp and useless, like it belonged to someone else. She came to Freud as a last resort, and what he discovered changed everything we understand about the cost of silence. Anna had been raised to be perfect, dutiful daughter, obedient wife. Her entire childhood was training for one role: to serve, to please, to make others comfortable. Her anger, never allowed. Ladies don't raise their voices. Her desires, irrelevant. Your job is to make your husband happy. Her opinions, unwelcome. Nobody wants to hear a woman argue, so she learned. She became exactly what they wanted: quiet, agreeable, selfless, the perfect performance. She married the man her family chose, not someone she loved. She'd learned that romantic love was childish and impractical. She married someone suitable, respectable, safe, and she hated every second of it. But she couldn't say that, couldn't even think it consciously, because good wives don't hate their husbands. Good women don't have regrets. Good people don't want to scream and run and burn it all down. So she buried it, all of it, every bit of rage, every ounce of resentment, every scream she wanted to unleash. And then one day, her arm stopped working. Specifically, her right arm, her dominant hand. Now here's where Freud's genius shows. He didn't just treat the symptom, he asked what the symptom was saying. And through weeks of analysis, talking about her dreams, her memories, her feelings she couldn't name, it came out. The arm that stopped working was the arm she used to serve her husband, to cook his meals, to mend his clothes, to perform all the duties of a proper wife. Her unconscious had made a decision her conscious mind couldn't make. I won't do this anymore. The paralyzed arm wasn't a malfunction. It was a message. It was her true self, finally finding a way to say no when her mouth couldn't form the words. Her body was doing what her mind wouldn't allow, refusing to keep performing. And when Freud helped her see this, when he helped her acknowledge the rage she'd been repressing, the resentment she'd been denying, the authentic self she'd been suffocating. Something remarkable happened. The arm started moving again, not immediately, not magically, but gradually, as she began to speak the truths she'd spent decades silencing, as she began to acknowledge the parts of herself she'd labeled as unacceptable. The symptom dissolved. Because it didn't need to exist anymore. The message had been heard. But here's what happened next that most people don't talk about. Anna's life fell apart. She left her husband. She estranged herself from her family. She lost her social standing, her security, everything that had defined her. And Freud's colleagues criticized him for it. "You destroyed this woman's life," they said. But Freud saw it differently. He hadn't destroyed her life. He destroyed her false life, the performance, the prison. And yeah, it was terrifying. Yeah, it was painful. Yeah, she lost everything she thought she was supposed to want. But for the first time in 32 years, she was alive. She was angry. She was messy. She was uncertain. But she was real. The false self had cracked, and the real self was finally breathing. Now I know what you're thinking. That's extreme. That's not me. I don't have paralyzed limbs. My life isn't that dramatic. But here's what you need to understand. Anna's story isn't unique. It's just visible. Most people's symptoms are quieter, subtler: anxiety, depression, vague physical complaints, chronic dissatisfaction, that persistent feeling of being lost. But it's the same mechanism, the same unconscious screaming, the same authentic self locked in the basement, finding whatever way it can to be heard. The question isn't whether this is happening to you. The question is, are you ready to listen? So here you are, at the edge of a question you've been avoiding your whole life. Who are you when you're not performing? It's terrifying, isn't it? Because you've spent so long being who you're supposed to be that you don't even know who you actually are anymore. The mask has been on so long, you're scared there's nothing underneath it. But here's what Freud understood. The real you isn't gone. It's just buried, and it's been waiting. Waiting for you to stop running, stop performing, stop pretending. Waiting for you to finally ask, what part of me have I been silencing? So how do you find your way back? How do you excavate a self you buried decades ago? Here's the truth. There's no easy answer, no 5-step program, no quick fix. But there is a process, and it starts with one radical act. Stop performing, just for a moment, just for a breath. Stop doing what you think you should do and ask what you actually want to do. Not what's productive, not what's responsible, not what others expect. What do you want? And when that voice in your head says, that's selfish, or that's irresponsible, or you can't, recognize that voice. That's the superego. That's the internalized parent. That's the prison guard. And for once, don't obey it. Feel what you've been avoiding. Your anger, your sadness, your fear, your desire. Whatever emotion you've labeled as too much or unacceptable, let yourself feel it. Not forever, not destructively, but consciously, deliberately. Because those emotions aren't the enemy. They're messengers from your authentic self, trying to tell you something you need to hear. Freud's entire method was built around this, creating space for the unconscious to speak. Free association, dream analysis, talking without censoring. You don't need to lie on a couch to do this, but you do need to stop editing yourself. Question the narrative. Whose life are you living? Whose dreams are you chasing? Whose voice is criticizing you? When you think, I should be more successful, who defines success? When you think, I should be happier, according to whom? When you think, I'm not enough, whose standards are you using? Most of what you believe about yourself isn't actually you, it's programming, and you can question it. Find witnesses. Anna couldn't heal alone. She needed Freud, someone who could hear what she couldn't say, see what she couldn't see, hold space for the parts of her she'd been taught to hate. You need that too. A therapist, yes, but also friends who can handle your authentic self, people who won't punish you for being real. Because here's the brutal truth. Some people in your life are invested in the false you. They need you to keep performing. And when you start being authentic, they'll fight it. Let them go. I know that's harsh. I know it's scary. But you can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. Accept the grief. Here's what nobody tells you about finding yourself. It hurts, because you have to grieve the life you've been living, the person you've been pretending to be, the years you spent buried. You have to mourn the version of yourself that tried so hard to be acceptable, even though it was killing you. That grief is real. Honor it, but don't let it stop you. Because on the other side of that grief is something you haven't felt in decades. Yourself. Not the performance, not the role, not the false self that's been running the show. The actual you. The buried you. The you that's been screaming from the basement, waiting to be heard. And yeah, that version of you is messy, imperfect, probably angry, definitely not what everyone wanted you to be. But it's real, and it's alive. And living as your authentic self, even if it's harder, even if it's scarier, even if it costs you everything you thought you wanted, that's not being lost. That's finally being found. Now, if this video just cracked something open in you, if you're sitting there realizing how much of yourself you've been silencing, there's something you need to understand. This is just the beginning. Because the part of you that's been buried, it's not just sitting there waiting to be discovered. It's been trying to communicate with you your entire life through patterns you keep repeating, relationships you keep choosing, and pain you can't explain. And in the next video, I'm going to show you exactly how to decode those messages, the language your unconscious has been using to scream the truths you won't let yourself hear. Don't miss it.